Emily Morgan stood at the edge of her modest studio apartment, staring at a blank canvas that seemed to mock her. It had been weeks since she had painted anything worthwhile, and her heart sank at the thought of what felt like the inevitable failure. She was once full of hope. The vibrant colors of her imagination danced on canvases that spoke of her soul's deepest yearnings, but none of it had garnered the recognition she had long dreamed of. Her paintings remained hidden in her small, cluttered studio, their beauty unappreciated by a world that seemed indifferent to her talent. Her finances, too, reflected the harsh reality of her circumstances. Bills piled up on her desk, unopened letters from creditors reminding her how quickly time was running out. Emily had no family nearby, and her friends, those who once admired her passion, had slowly drifted away, lost in their own lives. She felt entirely alone. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," she whispered to herself, the weight of doubt crushing her spirit. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Emily startled. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, there stood Mrs. Langley, her landlord, holding an envelope. "Emily, I'm sorry to bother you," Mrs. Langley said kindly but firmly. "I need to know when you'll be able to pay next month's rent. We're running out of time here." Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. She forced a smile. "I'm working on it, Mrs. Langley. I'll get it to you soon. I promise." Mrs. Langley nodded, her face softening. "I understand, dear. I just hope things turn around for you soon." As the door closed, Emily slumped against it, her mind spiraling into an abyss of anxiety. How long can I keep going like this? She wondered. Later that evening, unable to focus on her work, Emily decided to attend a local art fair in a small, upscale gallery downtown. She hoped that being around other artists might inspire her, or at least offer her a brief escape from the constant gnawing of her worries. The gallery buzzed with energy. Paintings hung elegantly on the walls, and the room was filled with art lovers sipping wine and discussing their interpretations of the works displayed. Emily wandered through the gallery, feeling both inspired and envious of the artists whose work adorned the walls. Why them and not me? Suddenly, she noticed a tall, distinguished man staring at one of the paintings, a vibrant piece full of bold, erratic strokes, not unlike her own style. His tailored suit and confident demeanor stood out among the crowd, and Emily could sense he wasn't just an ordinary attendee. He turned, catching her gaze. "You have an eye for art, don't you?" he said, walking over to her with a charming smile. "I guess you could say that," Emily replied nervously, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "I'm Lawrence Bradford," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "I couldn't help but notice the way you were studying the pieces. You're an artist, aren't you?" Emily hesitated before nodding. "Yes, but I haven't really made a name for myself yet." Bradford's eyes lit up with interest. "Well, then it sounds like you need the right opportunity." Emily's heart raced. Could this be it? She had heard stories of wealthy patrons who discovered unknown artists and launched their careers. Was she standing in front of such a person? "I happen to know the curator of an upcoming exhibition," Bradford continued, "and I think your work could be exactly what they're looking for. You should bring me a few pieces, and I'll make sure they're considered." The offer seemed too good to be true, and Emily felt a surge of hope. But beneath her excitement, a small voice of caution whispered in the back of her mind. Why would someone like him take an interest in me? Still, the opportunity was too tempting to pass up. Desperation often clouded judgment, and in that moment, Emily chose hope over fear. "Thank you, Mr. Bradford," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'd love to show you my work." They exchanged contact details, and Lawrence promised to arrange a meeting within the week. As Emily left the gallery that night, her heart was light for the first time in what felt like months. Maybe this was her moment, a chance to finally break free from the shadows of obscurity. Yet, as the days passed and the meeting with Lawrence approached, unease began to settle in. There was something in the way he had looked at her that she couldn't shake. But Emily pushed those thoughts aside. "He's offering you a lifeline," she reminded herself. "Don't sabotage it. Little did she know, the path she was about to embark on would be filled with unexpected twists, leading her to confront not only the outer world, but the inner battle of remaining true to herself. For Emily, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test not only her artistic vision, but her sense of integrity and self-worth. The morning of her meeting with Lawrence Bradford arrived sooner than Emily anticipated. She had spent the previous night wide awake, pacing her small studio apartment and worrying over which pieces to bring. Each of her paintings carried a part of her soul, and the thought of them being rejected, or worse, misunderstood, filled her with dread. She settled on 3 pieces: Fragmented Dreams, Beneath the Surface, and The Longing. All of them were deeply personal, a reflection of her struggle to find meaning in a world that often felt indifferent to her existence. Emily had packed them carefully in the early hours of the morning, her hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. As she made her way to the cafe where she was supposed to meet Lawrence, her mind raced. She clutched the paintings tightly, almost as if they were her lifeline. What if this is my only chance? What if this is the break I've been waiting for? She could already imagine her work hanging in a prestigious gallery, critics praising her, her name whispered among the circles she had once only dreamed of entering. But deep down, a gnawing fear lingered, warning her that it all felt too sudden, too easy. The cafe was bustling with energy when she arrived, but Lawrence Bradford stood out, seated at a corner table, his presence commanding attention. His perfectly tailored suit and polished shoes set him apart from the crowd of casually dressed patrons. He greeted her with a smile that seemed both welcoming and calculative. "Emily, it's great to see you," Lawrence said, standing up to shake her hand. "I was beginning to worry you might change your mind." "Sorry, Emily started, but he waved her apology away. "Let's take a look at what you brought," he said, getting straight to the point. Emily set the paintings on the table, carefully unwrapping them. As Lawrence gazed at her work, his eyes flickered with what seemed like genuine admiration. "These are bold," he said, his tone thoughtful. "I see a lot of raw emotion here. You don't hold back, do you?" Emily felt a swell of pride. But before she could respond, Lawrence's expression shifted into something more businesslike. "These will be perfect for the exhibition I mentioned. The curator is always looking for something that challenges the audience," he said, his eyes never leaving the canvas. "But," he paused, leaning back in his chair, "there are a few things we need to discuss before we proceed." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had known there would be conditions, but the way he said it made her uneasy. "What sort of things?" she asked cautiously. Lawrence leaned forward, lowering his voice as if they were discussing a secret. "First, you should know that the art world is as much about connections as it is about talent. That's why I'm here, to guide you through this. But it won't be without a price." Emily stiffened. "What do you mean?" Lawrence smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "The exhibition will take place in one of the most exclusive galleries in the city. The exposure you'll receive will be life-changing, but to get you there, I need to know you're fully committed. You'll need to follow my advice closely on everything. I'm not just talking about your art, Emily, but your public image, your demeanor, the way you present yourself to the world." Emily frowned. "I thought this was about my paintings." "It is," Lawrence assured her, "but no artist rises to the top based solely on their work. You'll need to align with the right people, attend the right events, dress the part, speak the part. I can help you with that, but I need to know you're willing to let me guide you." Emily hesitated. She had always believed that her art spoke for itself, that if she was good enough, the world would recognize her talent. But here was Lawrence, a man who had the power to open doors she could never reach on her own, telling her that it wasn't enough, that she wasn't enough. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Emily asked, her voice small. Lawrence's smile widened. "I'm asking you to trust me. If you want to make it in this world, you need someone like me to show you the ropes. I'll handle the connections, the business side of things. You, Emily, just need to play your part." The words "play your part" echoed in her mind. She wanted success more than anything. But at what cost? Could she really afford to give up control over her image, her voice, the very things that made her who she was? I don't know if I can do that, Emily said softly, doubt creeping into her voice. I want my art to stay true to who I am. Lawrence's expression hardened, though his voice remained calm. Don't be naive, Emily. Everyone in this world makes compromises. You can't cling to your ideals and expect to rise. That's not how this works. The question is, are you ready to do what it takes to succeed? Emily's heart raced. She looked at her paintings on the table, her very soul laid bare in those brushstrokes. The thought of them hanging in a prestigious gallery, admired by the art elite, was tantalizing. But Lawrence's words felt like a cage, slowly closing in around her. I'll need time to think about it, she said, her voice barely audible. Lawrence's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he stood up, smoothing out his suit. I understand. Take the weekend, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. As he turned to leave, he placed his business card on the table in front of her. When you're ready, give me a call. Emily sat there for a long time after Lawrence left, staring at her paintings and the business card that seemed to burn a hole through the table. She had always dreamed of this moment, of being discovered, of her work finally being seen. But now that it was within reach, the path to success felt more like a labyrinth of compromises, with Lawrence standing at the center, pulling the strings. She wasn't sure if she was willing to pay the price he demanded. As she gathered her paintings and headed home, a storm of thoughts swirled in her mind. She was on the brink of something big, but the question was, how much of herself was she willing to lose to get there? The weekend after her meeting with Lawrence Bradford stretched out in slow, agonizing hours. Emily's mind was a whirlpool of conflicting thoughts, doubts, and faint glimmers of hope. She spent most of her time staring at her paintings, as though they might somehow reveal the answers to the questions gnawing at her heart. What do I do? She thought over and over. Lawrence's words echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. You need someone like me to show you the ropes. It was tempting. He had offered her everything she thought she wanted: success, exposure, validation. But it wasn't just about her art anymore. He wanted her to play a role, to mold herself into something that fit his idea of what the world wanted to see. The idea of changing, of conforming, weighed heavily on her. Emily had always believed that art was about authenticity, but the harsh reality was that the bills piling up on her desk didn't care about authenticity. Neither did the landlord waiting for her next rent payment. On Sunday night, she couldn't take the indecision anymore. She called her best friend, Clara, someone she hadn't spoken to in a few weeks. Clara was one of the few people who still kept in touch after seeing Emily struggle in the unforgiving art world. Emily, it's been so long. How are you? Clara's voice was warm and familiar, like a ray of light cutting through the fog of doubt that clouded Emily's thoughts. I've been better, Emily admitted, biting her lip. Actually, I need your advice. Of course, Clara said without hesitation. What's going on? Emily explained everything about the meeting with Lawrence Bradford, the exhibition, the opportunity he'd offered her. As she spoke, she could hear Clara listening carefully, her friend's silence both comforting and unnerving. When she finished, Clara sighed. It sounds like an incredible opportunity, Emily. I mean, people would kill for a chance like that. I know, Emily replied, her voice tight. But he wants me to change. He wants to control everything, not just my art, but the way I present myself. It doesn't feel right. There was a pause before Clara spoke again. I get it. I really do. But maybe this is just how the industry works. Maybe you have to bend a little to get ahead, and once you're successful, you can call the shots. Emily swallowed hard, staring at the wall in front of her. But what if I lose myself in the process? What if, by the time I get there, I'm not the artist I want to be anymore? Clara's tone softened. That's a tough one, Em, but it's also about survival, right? I mean, you've been struggling for so long. Maybe this could finally give you some stability. You could use it as a stepping stone. Emily nodded, though Clara couldn't see her. I know. I just don't want to end up resenting everything I create because it isn't really mine. You won't, Clara reassured her. You're too true to yourself for that. But you've got to weigh the risks. Staying true to your art might mean staying stuck where you are, struggling for years. Can you handle that? Emily sat in silence for a moment, considering her friend's words. Could she continue living like this? Always on the edge, always just one missed payment away from losing everything? I don't know, Emily whispered. I really don't. Clara sighed again. I wish I had better advice, Em, but whatever you decide, I know you'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think. They said their goodbyes, and after the call, Emily found herself staring out of her window into the night. The city seemed distant, like a world she wasn't quite part of. She thought about all the other artists out there, some with less talent than her, but thriving because they knew how to navigate the game Lawrence had talked about. Is this just the price of making it? The next morning, she woke up with a strange sense of clarity, though her heart still felt heavy. She reached for the business card Lawrence had left on her table and dialed his number. He answered after just a few rings, his voice calm, expectant. Emily, he greeted her smoothly. I take it you've made your decision. I have, Emily said, gripping the phone tightly. I'll do it, but on one condition. Lawrence's voice was warm but firm. Go on. I need to maintain control over my art. I won't compromise the integrity of my work, she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. There was a pause on the other end. Then Lawrence spoke, his tone cautious. I understand your concern, Emily, but in this business, flexibility is key. If you want me to support you, you'll need to trust me. You'll need to be willing to adapt. Emily felt her stomach twist. Adapt. The word felt like a small betrayal, but she forced herself to speak. I'll listen to your advice on everything else, Lawrence, but my art has to stay mine. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Finally, Lawrence sighed, though it didn't sound like a sigh of defeat. It was more like someone deciding how far to push their advantage. Very well, he said, his tone even. I can work with that. But remember, Emily, there's a fine line between holding on to your integrity and letting it hold you back. I'll expect you to meet me halfway. Emily nodded, relief flooding her chest despite the uneasy undertone in his words. Thank you, Lawrence. I won't let you down. I'm sure you won't, he replied smoothly. I'll send you the details for the exhibition later this week. We'll need to get you prepared. As the call ended, Emily sat on her couch, staring at her phone. She had done it. She had agreed to the terms, well, most of them, but a part of her wondered if she had already given up more than she'd intended. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Lawrence sent over a long list of events, contacts, and preparation tasks. He instructed her on everything from how to dress for gallery events to how to engage with wealthy patrons. It all felt overwhelming and sometimes suffocating, but Emily pushed through it. She had to. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. At the same time, she spent every free moment pouring her heart into the paintings she would present at the exhibition. Each stroke of her brush felt like a battle between two parts of herself, the one chasing her dream and the one fighting to remain true to her art. The exhibition was fast approaching, and with every passing day, Emily felt the pressure mounting. Lawrence checked in regularly, ensuring she was following his guidance. And while she appreciated his help, the unease in her chest grew. The night before the exhibition, Emily stood in her studio, surrounded by her paintings. She traced her fingers over the canvas of the longing, one of her most personal pieces, the one she felt most connected to. It had been painted in a moment of pure vulnerability, a reflection of the yearning she carried inside. She couldn't help but wonder what people would see when they looked at it. Would they feel what she felt when she painted it? Or would they see only what Lawrence had shaped her into a marketable product? That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, her mind torn between hope and dread, excitement and fear. The next day would be her moment, but the question remained. Would it be her moment, or someone else's? The day of the exhibition arrived, casting a surreal haze over Emily's world. The gallery, one of the most prestigious in the city, was buzzing with preparations, its walls lined with carefully curated artwork from emerging and established artists alike. Emily's paintings, though unfamiliar to the art world, now held a place among them, framed in sleek black borders that added a touch of elegance. It was almost unbelievable to see her work here, in a space that had always felt unreachable. Emily stood at the edge of the room, her palms damp and her heart racing. Guests were beginning to arrive. Well-dressed art lovers, critics, collectors, and patrons who moved through the space with a casual confidence she envied. Among them, she spotted Lawrence Bradford, his sharp suit cutting through the crowd, his presence as commanding as ever. He caught sight of her and made his way over, a wide smile on his face. "Emily, you look wonderful," he said, his gaze sweeping over her outfit. She wore a tailored black dress that Lawrence had suggested, simple but elegant, meant to let her art speak without distraction. "Thanks," she replied, though her nerves made her voice quieter than she intended. "Tonight is the beginning of something big for you," Lawrence said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Everyone who matters is here. Just remember what we talked about: confidence, poise. You've got this." Emily nodded, though her stomach churned. Lawrence's voice, once a source of guidance, now felt more like a constant reminder of the expectations she needed to meet. She glanced at her paintings, fragmented dreams, beneath the surface, and the longing, now hanging in the spotlight, their vivid colors catching the eyes of passers-by. Her heart ached at the thought of what might be lost in the translation of their meaning. Would anyone understand the emotion behind her work? Or would they see only what Lawrence had packaged for them? A promising new artist, right for the picking? As the evening progressed, Lawrence introduced Emily to several high-profile guests. Each interaction felt rehearsed, her words measured, her responses practiced. She smiled politely, shook hands, and talked about her inspiration, though the conversations felt shallow, as if the meaning behind her work was slipping through her fingers. "So, Emily," said one collector, a tall woman with sharp features and an air of authority, "your work is quite evocative. The longing in particular caught my eye. What inspired that piece?" Emily hesitated, her mind flashing back to the night she had painted it. The raw emotion, the loneliness, the desperate yearning for something just out of reach. She opened her mouth to speak, but Lawrence's voice echoed in her head. "Confidence, poise. Stay polished, stay professional." "I wanted to capture a sense of yearning," she said, her voice steady, but the words felt rehearsed. "It's about the universal human experience of longing for something beyond what we can see or touch." The woman nodded thoughtfully, but Emily could tell the response didn't resonate deeply. The collector moved on, her interest fading just as quickly as it had sparked. Emily's heart sank. This wasn't how she wanted to express herself. These weren't the conversations she wanted to have about her art. Hours passed, and the gallery filled with praise and admiration for her work. People took photos in front of her paintings, complimented the colors, the technique. Yet despite the positive feedback, Emily felt more disconnected from her art than ever before. Each compliment felt like it was meant for someone else, for the version of her that Lawrence had shaped for this night, not for the real Emily who had poured her soul onto the canvas. As the night wore on, Emily found herself drifting toward a quiet corner of the gallery, away from the crowd, away from the shallow conversations. She needed a moment to breathe, to think. She had come so far, but why did it feel like she had lost something vital along the way? She stared at the longing, the painting that had always been closest to her heart. But tonight it felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that the Emily who had created that piece was slowly slipping away. A voice broke through her thoughts. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Emily turned to see a man standing beside her, his eyes fixed on the painting. He was different from the others, not dressed in the formal attire that everyone else wore, but in a simple button-up shirt and jeans. His dark hair was tousled, and he had an air of quiet confidence that put Emily at ease. Thanks, she said softly, grateful for the distraction. It's one of my favorites. He turned to look at her, a small smile on his lips. I could tell. There's something deeply personal about it. It feels honest. Emily blinked, taken aback by his words. You think so? He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Yeah, a lot of the art here feels polished, almost too perfect, like it's been shaped to fit into some kind of mold. But this feels raw. It's like you weren't afraid to show something real. Emily's breath caught in her throat. For the first time that evening, someone had seen what she had truly put into her work. He hadn't looked at it through the lens of success or prestige. He had seen the vulnerability she had poured into the painting, the part of herself she had fought to hold on to. I'm glad you think that, Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. It means a lot to me. He smiled again, and it was warm, genuine. You should hold on to that. Don't let anyone take that away from you. His words hit her like a wave. For so long, she had been grappling with the idea of compromising her vision, of changing who she was to fit the mold that Lawrence, and the art world, wanted her to fill. But this stranger, this man who saw through the polished exterior, had reminded her of something she had been afraid to admit to herself, that she could lose the very thing that made her art worth creating. Before she could ask his name, Lawrence appeared at her side, his tone brisk. Emily, come. There are a few more people I need you to meet. She glanced back at the man, but he simply gave her a nod, understanding in his eyes, before disappearing into the crowd. As Lawrence led her back into the throng of guests, Emily's mind raced. She had succeeded, at least in the way Lawrence had wanted her to. Her name was already circulating among the elite. But something inside her was shifting, growing louder with each passing moment. When the night finally came to a close, Emily stood in the empty gallery, looking at her paintings for the last time before they were taken down and delivered to their new owners. Lawrence approached her, a glass of champagne in his hand. Congratulations, he said, raising the glass. Tonight was a triumph. I've already had several collectors express interest in buying your work. You're on your way, Emily. She forced a smile, but it felt hollow. Thanks. Lawrence studied her for a moment, his expression softening. What's wrong? You should be celebrating. I am, Emily said quietly, but even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't true. The joy she had expected to feel was nowhere to be found. She had everything she thought she wanted, but why did it feel like something was missing? Lawrence placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. This is just the beginning. Keep trusting me, and you'll go far. As he walked away, Emily stared after him, her heart heavy with doubt. She had crossed a threshold tonight, but at what cost? The stranger's words echoed in her mind, reminding her of a truth she could no longer ignore. She had compromised to get here, but how much more of herself was she willing to lose to stay? The days following the exhibition were a whirlwind. Emily's phone rang constantly, collectors, art critics, and gallery owners all vying for her attention. Her inbox was flooded with offers, interviews, and invitations to events she never would have dreamed of attending a few weeks ago. On paper, she had made it. She had achieved the kind of success she'd longed for. But as the world celebrated her rise, Emily felt more lost than ever. Every time she looked at her paintings, now sitting in other people's homes, she couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. They no longer felt like hers. They were products now, sold and repackaged for the art elite, stripped of the personal meaning she had poured into them. And worse, Lawrence's voice echoed in every decision she made. It was as if her creativity was being filtered through someone else's vision, someone else's rules. It had been weeks since she'd picked up a paintbrush. Fear clung to her every time she even thought about starting something new. Would it be her work anymore? Or would it be something molded by the expectations that now surrounded her? Emily sat in her small studio apartment, staring at the blank canvas in front of her, paralyzed by indecision. Lawrence had already sent her a detailed schedule of the next steps. More exhibitions, more networking, more appearances. But each new milestone felt like a step further away from the artist she had once been. Her phone buzzed again, Lawrence's name flashing on the screen. With a deep breath, Emily let the call go to voicemail. She couldn't face him right now. She couldn't even face herself. Suddenly, the memory of the man from the gallery, the one who had seen through everything, came flooding back. His words echoed in her mind. Don't let anyone take that away from you. It was the first time in weeks someone had spoken to her like she was more than a product, more than a tool for profit. In that moment, something inside Emily shifted. She realized she had a choice, one she had been too afraid to acknowledge until now. She didn't have to keep following the path Lawrence had laid out for her. She didn't have to keep compromising her vision, her integrity, just to stay afloat in this world. It was time to decide who she really wanted to be. Before she could second-guess herself, Emily grabbed her coat and rushed out of her apartment, her mind swirling with adrenaline. She needed to see Lawrence. She needed to end this. The drive to his office felt longer than it should have. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how Lawrence would react, but it didn't matter. She had made her decision. When she arrived, Lawrence greeted her with his usual charm, but she could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Emily," he said smoothly, "I wasn't expecting you. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength she had. "I can't do this anymore, Lawrence." His expression shifted, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "What do you mean?" I can't keep going down this path. This isn't me. I'm losing myself in all of this, and I don't want to wake up one day and realize I've become someone I don't recognize." Lawrence's eyes narrowed. "Emily, you're on the verge of something huge. You've already made a name for yourself. Why would you throw all of that away?" "I'm not throwing anything away," she said firmly, though her heart raced. "I'm reclaiming it. My art, my life, my choices. I can't keep compromising who I am just to fit into someone else's vision." Lawrence leaned back in his chair, studying her closely. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You knew what this would take when you agreed to work with me. You can't expect to succeed without playing the game." Emily shook her head. "I thought I could, but I don't want to be part of a world where success means giving up who I am. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, Lawrence, but I need to do this on my own terms now." Silence hung between them, thick with tension. For a moment, Emily wondered if she had made a mistake, if she was walking away from the one chance she'd ever have. But then, Lawrence's expression softened. He sighed, though there was no warmth in his tone. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "But if that's what you want, I won't stop you. Just remember, the art world doesn't take kindly to people who walk away from opportunity." Emily felt a weight lift off her chest. She had expected a fight, but now that it was over, she realized how exhausted she had been, constantly fighting to stay afloat in a world that didn't feel like hers. "I'll take my chances," she replied softly, turning toward the door. "Goodbye, Lawrence." As she stepped out of his office and into the crisp evening air, Emily felt an unfamiliar sensation wash over her: freedom. The future ahead of her was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like her future. No more compromises, no more trying to fit into someone else's vision. That night, Emily returned to her studio, her mind buzzing with ideas. The blank canvas stood in front of her, waiting. Slowly, she dipped her brush into the paint, letting the colors flow without thinking, without worrying about what anyone else would think. This was hers. For the first time in months, she felt connected to her art again, the way she had when she first started painting, before the pressures, before the expectations. The next morning, Emily woke up to a flurry of messages, emails from galleries, calls from collectors, even Lawrence's voice lingering in a voicemail. But this time, she didn't feel the need to respond. She was done chasing a version of herself that didn't exist. Weeks passed, and while the spotlight dimmed on her as the art world moved on, Emily found a new peace in her work. She hosted a small, intimate gallery show, one where she controlled every aspect, from the pieces displayed to the way her story was told. The crowd was smaller, less glamorous, but the connections she made felt real, the conversations about her art meaningful. One evening, after the show had wrapped, Emily stood alone in the gallery, gazing at her latest piece. It was raw, untamed, and full of the passion she thought she had lost. A man approached her, someone who had been at her previous exhibition. "It's even more powerful this time," he said quietly, his eyes on the canvas. Emily smiled, the warmth in her heart growing. "Thank you. This one, it's me." And as she stood there, no longer burdened by expectations, she knew that she had finally found her place in the art world. Not as the next big thing, but as an artist who had stayed true to herself. And that, she realized, was the only success that truly mattered.